Welcome to Discovery Class. As you grow older, do you make good decisions? When it comes to making those decisions, do you take time to think about them first? Or are they hasty and they're quick? And your thoughts come right off the top of your head, and whatever comes to your mind, you go ahead and you say it, and often you do it. We're going to study an old man today. We're going to study his behavior, because that's what he faced. In our study of Joseph, Jacob's 10 sons have left Canaan, and they've gone to Egypt to buy food. They've been gone now for several weeks. Now they've just come home. Jacob, their father, is an old man now. He's given me some information, and the information that I read in the scripture concerning him is a little bit disconcerting. He's going to have to make a decision with what he's going to receive. And that's my lesson today, making decisions growing old. After World War II, a new nation was born on earth, and it was approved by the United Nations Charter in 1948. That nation now is 75 years old. And it was born as a very poor nation in both natural resources and in self-defense. Canada, where I live, has the world's largest supply of fresh water. It's very rich that way. And it's the fourth in the world in land base regarding producing grain. We're third in the world for that. And we also have a good government. We foster democracy. And that democracy is often the envy of other nations. That new nation, born after World War II, now 75 years old, has hardly any fresh water. It has no oil reserves. Canada has lots of oil reserves. Its farmland is very poor and very dry. And it's small as a nation. It's half the size of Nova Scotia here in our country. But at the age of 75, it becomes perhaps the most successful country on earth because they boast a GDP of over $100 billion a year in money. And I wonder why they did that. I think, as I study that nation, they make good decisions growing old. Do you know what the nation's name is? It's called Israel, the nation of the Jews. Here's an example of a good decision they made recently. It was called Operation Solomon. There were 14,325 Ethiopian Jews living in Ethiopia that wanted to leave. They were poor, they were beggars, but they were Jews. And they were not wanted, and they were discriminated against, and they were put to death. They made a cry to the parliament over in Israel called the Knesset. There's 120 members in that Knesset. When they made that cry, they said, "Would you come and get us and bring us to Israel?" Do you know what that little nation did? They immediately hired 35 wide-bodied aircraft. And in a span of 36 hours, flying from Ben Gurion Airport over in Israel to the international airport in Addis Ababa over in Ethiopia, in a span of 36 hours, they flew 14,325 Jewish immigrants into Palestine in order for them to have a new homeland. They wanted to see their Jerusalem with their own eyes. It was the promised land that they had been told about for generations, and they were welcomed home. That little nation welcomed every one of them. It was a triumph, really, against evil. And it was a win against the Hitlers of this world that said, you're not welcome. And it was a fulfillment of a people's destiny. A 2,000-year-old dream to return home and waiting. What did they get when they found that country and when they got home? They found kindness, they found acceptance, and they found a reuniting of a lost tribe. That's a good decision by a young nation that's growing old. In any society, that one or ours, it's hard to find a leader that you can trust. It might be the president, might be the prime minister, might be even the head of a religious body. Could be a CEO in business, maybe a teacher, an educator, or it could be a doctor. Respect and trust are the two foundation stones that mark the solidity of a good family. Jacob, in the book of Genesis, was called a patriarch. That meant he was the head of a family. And his family consisted of 12 boys and 1 girl. We've been studying the life of this man. And today we're going to look at respect because it's going to be tested. One of his sons, his name is Joseph. When he was only 17 years old, Jacob was told that Joseph was killed by a wild animal because his brother had brought his bloodied coat back to the father, and Joseph was never seen again. Move the clock ahead. Joseph isn't dead. He's been living in Egypt, hundreds of miles away. From slavery, where he was placed, he's now risen to royalty. Joseph has become the second command under Pharaoh of all of Egypt. Famine has created a worldwide disaster. Jacob has sent his 10 sons to Egypt to buy grain because Canaan was also ravaged with that drought. They buy their grain. They encounter Joseph. They don't recognize him because he thinks they're spies. Simeon, one of the 10 brothers, he's locked up as a hostage, and he'll only be released when the youngest brother is brought back to see Joseph, to verify that their motives are pure. The 9 remaining brothers, they go home. They have their grain. They didn't have to pay for it. Their money was returned in the grain bin with them. And they were given rations for the trip, just almost like skip the dishes, for their whole journey home. Now, they have to tell Jacob, their father, all the bad news. When he receives that news, that's what we're going to talk about. When Jacob does that, that's going to be my lesson. I'll read it for you. It's found in Genesis chapter 42, starting at verse 33. When they got back to their father, Jacob, back in the land of Canaan, they told him everything that had happened, saying, "The man who runs the country of Egypt spoke to us roughly, and he accused us of being spies. We told him, 'We're honest men. We're not spies.' There were 12 of us brothers, sons of one father. One is gone. The youngest is with our father in Canaan. But the master of the country said, 'Leave one of your brothers with me. Take food for your starving families and go. Bring your youngest brother back to me, proving that you're honest men and you're not spies. And then I'll give your brother back, and you'll be free to come and go into our country as often as you want.'" Remember what I said at the outset. Respect and trust are the two foundation stones that mark a strong family. Jacob, the patriarch, head of the family, hears what his sons have just told him. And he loses his respect and his trust by his sons. Does he make a good decision growing old? Just watch. Jacob has been God's fearing man. God told Abraham, his grandfather, that he's going to build a nation that is going to be called the family of God. And it's going to be an example to the whole world on how to behave. God would be the head of the nation. Jacob and his offsprings would be the caretakers. All of you listening to me, you've grown older. You're mature now. You faced all kinds of hardships in your life. How did you handle them? What did Jacob do? Verse 38. Their father said to them, "You're taking everything I got. Joseph's gone. Simeon's gone. And now you want to take Benjamin. If you had your way, you'll leave me with nothing." He hears the unexpected, and look at how he handles it. Class, lest we're too hard on that man. As I've gotten older, I'm kind of with you. I'm faced more and more with the unexpected. When that happens, my tendency is to leave God out of it. He's been with me now a long time in my life's journey. But when trouble comes suddenly, I'm foolishly pushed to handle it my way. I forget that God has been with me all along. But when the unexpected hits, I forget. Do you forget? Or is it just me? I get brittle. I'm full of fear. I get resentment. I feel like running. I don't talk much. I fear danger. In other words, walking by faith is really hard. Listening to God in the midst of the unexpected, I'm afraid. And I'm afraid I'm also a flop. Over and over, I have had to learn this lesson the hard way. You would think that as I grew older, I'd get better. Class, it doesn't. There's always disappointment in me. Do you find that? Jacob did. His walking by faith. Now he seems to fall apart, even though he knew the Lord for over 100 years. When he hears his son's report of their encounter in Egypt, he throws respect and trust, it seems, right out the window. At this very moment, he could have said to his sons, "Wait, what you have told me does really disturb me. But Jehovah, he's still sovereign. God is still the boss. He conducts the affairs of men. What you have just described to me is the most frightening, unexpected thing I think I've ever heard. But this Egyptian ruler who's taken Simon from us, and he now wants Benjamin from us. We know Joseph is no more, but we also believe that God knows all things, and he's the ruler over all, not this foreign Egyptian ruler. We're going to continue to trust him, just like we've always done. The news you brought is very bad, but at the same time, God's on our side, and we shouldn't even fret." That should have been their pep talk. That's what he should have said. But what happened? Old Jacob, that old man now, he shrivels in fear. Instead of saying, "God's at work. He knows more about this than we do. We must trust him." What does Jacob say? "You betrayed me. Why didn't you keep your mouth shut? You didn't have to tell him about our family. Why did you tell him you had a little brother called Benjamin? He didn't need to know that. Jacob could have said, God's watching over us, even in this famine. And if you have to go back and buy more grain, go ahead. God will go with you. And he'll bring Simeon back, and he'll bring Benjamin back, and you just wait and see. Jacob, instead, if something happens to Benjamin, I'll go to my grave brokenhearted. Those were his words. One of the brothers, Reuben, he's the only sensible one, he says to his father Jacob, let Benjamin go. If we don't return with him, you can take both of my sons and you can put them to death. That'll be my guarantee. Reuben had more respect and he had more trust in his dad. But listen, don't be too hard on Jacob. What he did in this story, we all do. When a tough decision has to be made, like Jacob had to make, what do? We deny and we delay. We don't get facts straight. Hence, we don't believe what's happening is really true. And when we deny, naturally the next step is delay. As soon as all that grain was gone that they had purchased in Egypt, now come the events of chapter 43, verse 1. I'll read it. Now the famine was severe in the land. And it came about when they had finished eating the grain, which they had brought back from Egypt, that their father said to them, okay, go back. Buy us a little feed. Judah, one of the other brothers, he speaks up and he says, the man solemnly warned us, Dad, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. And if you send your brother with us, I'll obey. So what does this fella Judah say? Dad, if you're not sending Benjamin, we're not going. If he's not coming with us, we won't be in Egypt. We'll stay here and die. Have you noticed what God is doing in all of this? The famine was severe. It didn't stop. Still no rain. Still no crops. Still no relief. But God's still at work. He controls Mother Nature. All the brothers' grain sacks are now empty. Jacob denied and then he delayed. Now he's in danger. If they don't get to the store and buy bread, they're all going to die. Dad, we're out of grain. Now what? Are you going to let Benjamin go or are you not? You've been dilly-dallying. We should have been there and back by now. God knew what he was doing in the famine. He knew what he was doing with Joseph. He knew what he was doing with Jacob. He knew what he was doing with each of his brothers, including the little boy called Benjamin. And he knows what he's doing with you. The mess that you're in. Do you not think that God knows about your mess? Democracy in our Western world is under attack. Don't you think God knows what's going on in Canada when democracy is under attack? The country of the Ukraine right now is being attacked by a large enemy and destroying it, inside and out. Do you think God doesn't know that? There are Christians living in the Ukraine, wonderful people. Our country has been ravaged with COVID. Some of them have died. I've done their funeral. Do you think God knows? Inflation, unemployment, hunger is now coming to Canada. Do you think God knows that? If you have troubles and you're starting this brand new year, wouldn't you like to have God on your side? He knows all about you and he knows your background. Verse 11, 43. Back to the story. Their father Jacob gave in. As if it has to be, then it has to be, he says. But do this first. Stuff your packs with the finest products from our land that you can find. Take them back to that man as gifts. As an aside, have you ever tried to bribe God? That's what Jacob's trying to do. I'll keep reading. Take balm and take honey, some spices and perfumes and some pistachios and some almonds, and take plenty of money. Pay back double what he returned in your sack, and take your brother and get going. Those are the words of Jacob. Class, those are also the words of a desperate man. His 9 sons are listening to his words. I wonder what they're thinking. They're thinking their dad has respect? I don't think so. Their dad has trust now? I don't think so. These are the words of a terrified man. Their father, the patriarch of the family, the father of the nation. But then, almost as an afterthought, the Bible says, verse 14, and may God give you grace in the eyes of that man, so that he'll send back your other brother along with Benjamin. For me, I've got nothing left. I've lost everything. Those last words of Jacob I find very telling. God's name in this story is finally mentioned. God, give you grace. And for me, nothing is left. For the first time, Jacob mentions the Lord. And he mentions him by name, but it's almost in disbelief. His final words are the words of a man who has given up. For me, there's nothing left. I've lost everything. Do you say that? Now our story shifts, and it shifts very quickly. In verse 15 I read, the men took the gifts, double the money, and Benjamin, and they lost no time in getting to Egypt and meeting Joseph. Here's something I don't want you to ever forget. When trouble comes, and they do, when respect is lost, and you think it's gone, and trust is over and your hearts are breaking, is it easier to act your way into new feelings or feel your way into new actions? Watch what the scripture says. The men, they took the gifts, they lost no time in the travel, and they meet Joseph. All those 3 verbs are very action verbs. Is it easier to act your way into new feelings? They took, they lost no time, and they meet Joseph. I don't know of a better remedy for overcoming feelings of despair and depression than those 3 verbs. They took, they traveled, and they meet. Remember the words of Rudyard Kipling. If you can face or force your heart and nerve and sinew to serve your turn long after they are gone, and so hold on when there's nothing left within you but the will which says, keep on. Do you think these brothers are wasting their time going back to Egypt to buy more grain? Do you think they'll ever see their brother Simeon again from the dungeon? Are they foolhardy bringing their young brother Benjamin along? Do you think he'll be arrested just like his older brother and they'll never see him again? He'll become a hostage? Do you think Joseph will keep his word? There's old Jacob back home. Do you think he's going to feel so sorry for himself that he's going to die in his old age? Better yet, where's God in all of this? Well, next week, I'm going to answer every one of those questions. And you're going to be here to find out what they are. And you're going to find out what happened. I'm going to look for you next week. Come on back.